YouTube. Welcome back to my channel. As you may know, I love vampire books and I read them a lot. So I had this idea to make a video series where I reviewed the many vampire books that I have read in my life through the context of different categories, whether it be older, genre, audience, etc. And I didn't really know where to start. So I was doing some very preliminary research and I came across something that was a little bit odd. When I was trying to look up Canadian vampire authors and Canadian vampire stories, little came up. There was hardly any results. And that is unacceptable. So as someone who someday wants to join this list, I feel that it is my responsibility to review all of the Canadian authors that I am currently aware of that have written about vampires. I'm sure that there are many other Canadian authors that I have yet to discover, so if you know of any that are currently not in this video, comment down below because I would love to make a part 2. So welcome to my new series of vampire recommendations, episode 1, Canadian vampire authors. I will be going in order of the amount of books I have read by a certain author. So the first author I wish to highlight is Kelley Armstrong. Born in Sudbury, Ontario, and has been writing since the early 2000s, Kelley Armstrong is a staple in the urban fantasy genre. Her longest urban fantasy series, Women of the Otherworld, currently has 13 books in its series. She has also written 2 YA series, crime novels, thrillers, middle grade series, and short stories. She's a very prolific writer. I own many of her books, and the Darkest Powers trilogy is my favorite YA trilogy ever. I remember reading this book during my middle school silent reading period and just having to hold back my gasps and emotions when it was revealed what Derek's powers were. I was super engaged. It was really fun. The Women of the Otherworld series is also really good. I am quite deep into it, but I have yet to finish all 13 books, and it's because of this series that I can recommend her not only as an amazing author of witches, demons, sorcerers, werewolves, but also vampires. She has secondary characters in the series who are vampires, including the character of Cassandra, and in the 4th book they're actually even followed by a vampire ghost, which is a really interesting concept. Although they are only a small piece in the series' puzzle, the vampire characters add to the wonderful dynamics and world building of her urban fantasy universe. I could not recommend Kelley Armstrong's urban fantasy series enough. It is unique, engaging, interesting, and very well written. I really love this series. I've been reading it since high school. She also represents Canada very well, as a lot of her settings in her books are set in or outside of Canada. This book is set on Vancouver Island, so we love to see that. I also admit I do have a slight personal tie to Kelley Armstrong because I met her during one of my high school's readathons and she even signed one of my books. So I could not recommend her enough. She is one of my favorite authors and is a huge inspiration for me. So please check out Kelley Armstrong's works. The second vampire Canadian author that I have decided to recommend is the one that I have read the second most amount of books for, and that is Nancy Baker. She is a Canadian author from Toronto. I have read 3 of her books, but I only own the physical copy of 1. I read the other 2 on ebook, and those books are called The Night Inside, its sequel, Blood and Chrysanthemums, and A Terrible Beauty. The former duology, The Night Inside and Blood and Chrysanthemums, is set in Toronto, with its sequel being set, I believe, in Banff. Baker's stories are very well written and have a very big importance in character relationships, dynamics, and backstories. Her other standalone novel, A Terrible Beauty, was a very fantastic gender-swapped vampire retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It was very compelling and the writing style was very dreamlike. It fit really well for the Beauty and the Beast aesthetic. Her writing has been compared to Anne Rice, and although that is a cliche, I would have to agree, and I enjoy Anne Rice vampires anyway, so I'm not complaining. Her books are also pretty short for the most part, which I think is a good thing if you wanted to get started in the urban fantasy genre, but didn't really want to get into a book that was about 700 pages. So I'd say that Nancy Baker vampire books are a really good place to start for that. So check out Nancy Baker's Vampire Stories for some really good, really fun late 90s urban fantasy romps. So for my last 3 entries in this recommendations video, I have unfortunately only read 1 book or less by each author, but I still recommend them anyway. So the next author and book that I am recommending is pretty obscure, as they are a relatively local author and they are recently self-published, and that is Darker Than by J.W. Patten. This is a sort of in-between between a middle grade and a younger YA about a female protagonist who is hiding from a monster who is chasing after her, and she is put under the protection of 3 people: a witch, a werewolf, and a vampire. This is a very exciting, action-based and magical-based book, and I really enjoyed the werewolf and vampire dynamics, as they are old friends who are put under the same magical protection seal, and the vampire is an old stuffy vampire, and the werewolf is, I believe, Irish, and he's just really fun and exciting, and they have a really cool dynamic. I don't really read a lot of books that skew that young, but for the most part I really enjoyed it. I found it very engaging, very exciting, and a very fun addition to the genre. I understand it may be harder for people to access as it is self-published, local, and published fairly new, but if you do get the chance, please try to check it out. I actually only know about the existence of this story because J.W. Patten is a distant cousin of mine, so I was able to get the book from a family member and read it. So the third author that I recommended was J.W. Patten with his book Darker Than, which is the first book in a planned series. So the 4th author that I wish to discuss has been dubbed Canada's answer to Anne Rice, and that is Nancy Kilpatrick. She is an older Canadian Gothic, horror, and fantasy author who is known most famously for her vampire works. The reason she is so much lower down on my vampire recommendations list is because I have unfortunately not read any of her full-length vampire novels. I have only read 1 short story in this collection called The Mammoth Book of Dracula, edited by Stephen Jones. This book is a collection of short stories that are dedicated to Dracula, starting from 1897 going well into the 1990s. A lot of these stories in here are very hit or miss, so it is quite the anthology, but the short story that I had read by Nancy Kilpatrick is called Teaserama from 1997. This short story is incredibly weird, but really unique and interesting. It is about Dracula existing in the modern 20th century, falling in love and stalking the showgirl Betty Page. So I found that incredibly weird, but such a weird out there idea that I was very intrigued to try and seek out the rest of her works. Luckily, the short story collection gives a lot of info about what other anthologies, short stories, and works that she has published, so I will be able to check her out later. So though I have not read a lot of Nancy Kilpatrick's works, she is still the 4th Canadian vampire author that I wish to recommend just because her 1 short story stood out to me so much. So I hope that the rest of her vampire works are just as cool and exciting. So the 5th and final author that I wish to recommend for this video is Drew Hayden Taylor. Drew Hayden Taylor is an Ojibwe journalist, playwright, and author of the YA novel The Night Wanderer, which I understand was originally a play that he then also turned into a novel. Now, the only reason I have him as my final recommendation is because I have not read the novel itself. I have read the graphic novel adaptation. It was adapted by Alison Kustra with art by Michael Wyatt. I actually read the comic book adaptation of the novel for a summer class in university that was titled Contagion, which was an English course. I took it in the summer of 2019. I find that a little bit foreboding given the world today. Now, The Night Wanderer is about an Indigenous teenage protagonist as she struggles with her family, her school life, her boyfriend, and just in general everything about her life, while also encountering a vampire who decides to board at her house for a little bit. Now, I found this comic book adaptation really engaging. The art style was very simple, but it was very beautiful and got its message across very well. I loved the all-indigenous cast, including the vampire who's indigenous too. That's something I've actually never seen before, and I was actually shocked that I've never seen it before. So I was really, really happy to see such a diverse and culturally unique story for a vampire. Not all the same white Byronic European vampires. This story includes a lot of very important issues, including colonization, that are not only for the protagonist, but that the vampire faces as well. So I found that very, very interesting and engaging. The comic adaptation is only about 100 pages, so it is an excellent way to properly absorb the story and engage with it. And it's really, really important, I think, and introduces a lot of issues and also introduces a lot of indigenous language and culture for first-time readers. So I highly recommend this YA comic adaptation of the book. Sadly, that is the end of all of the Canadian vampire authors that I have read. I find that incredibly depressing. I could talk about vampire books all day, and I only had 5 to show you guys today. So if you know of any other really interesting Canadian vampire authors that you wish to discuss, please comment down below, because I want to make a part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of this topic. I also plan to make even more vampire recommendation videos like this for other types of vampire books, whether it be different genres, different series, different audiences, different really weird categories. So if you have any of those you want to hear me talk about, please also comment down below. I have so many of them here, but I want to read more and more and more. Although this video is a little bit short and a little bit relaxed and carefree, I am glad that you sought this video out and wanted to get recommendations on Canadian authors, because, I don't know, I'm very proud and excited to talk about Canadian authors, and I don't get to do that a lot, especially in the vampire genre. So that's the end of this video. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for way more vampire recommendation videos that I plan to do in the future. Stay spooky, everybody. Goodbye! I want to show off my shirt as well, because I'm extremely proud of it. The original horror show, Dracula, a Universal picture.